Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our latest webcast, The New Age of Agile Risk Management, and subtitled Eyes Forward. We know that we've been living in a world of looking at risk management in the rearview mirror, and we're very happy to be here to talk to you about some of the work that we've been engaging with our clients and some research around what's changing in the new focus on risk management. And I know a lot of you are working on this, and we're very pleased to have so many of you here. So it's obviously a key topic. So thank you for that. My name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions, and I know many of you, and so welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Hans van Ness, our COO. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you.
So this webcast is going to take 50 minutes. That's 50, not 15, but there's a lot to cover, and I think you'll find it thought-provoking. We are looking forward to your questions, so please ask questions as we go through. You'll see on your GoToWebinar panel, there's a question panel there. Please ask questions as we go through, and we'll endeavour to answer them at the end. And if we don't get time to answer them, we'll do them by email. But that's a good way of getting your thoughts down as we go along and making it as much value for you as possible. So we're going to start talking a little bit about this whole topic of digital and the digital age, the digital natives, and this whole focus on transformation, and just work out what's really going on and how it impacts risk management, which is what's really important for us in this discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about risk management and the emerging imperatives, what the changes in business are forcing on the demands we have on risk management, and I think you'll echo a lot of that. And then we want to talk about some key vectors for change, 8 vectors about where we need to really change and focus our attention for having effective risk management in the future. And then we're going to look at a new Agile model, and we'll have a summary of next steps and Q&A. And as I say, ask questions as you go through, please do. So many of you know us at Consider Solutions, but our context, our focus is kind of influenced by this kind of mission, if you like, about focusing on world-class finance, world-class operations. And to us, that means driving better business results, better business outcomes, reducing cost of operations, optimizing cash flow, and having better risk management. And on the right-hand side, you see these pillars: financial control and compliance, obviously very central to our discussion today, as is broader risk management, enterprise risk management, and the like. And the pillar on the right is about process transformation and optimization in core processes, core business processes, as well as in risk management. And as you can imagine, as you know, these things all interrelate. So this is kind of an interesting intersection of these disciplines. And of course, all of this cannot really be achieved without a good understanding of technology and data. So that's our point of view. And a lot of the ideas and best practices we share, they don't just come from our own folks sitting in a dark room somewhere. They are influenced by some of the great companies we work with, and these are some of them. So a lot of these discussions and these ideas have emerged from interactions with companies like these, so we're very grateful to them. So first of all, I've asked you to ask your questions. We're going to ask you a question first. We've got a few little polls. They're all anonymous. Just for the benefit of us all, I want you to say what your primary role, your primary function is. So are you primarily risk management, primarily controls and or compliance, primarily IT security or an IT related function, 4 another business function, or 5 a consultant advisor? It's all anonymous, but it just helps us and helps you all understand the dynamics of answers to other questions. So that should not take you very long. So I think 5 seconds should be enough. So how are we doing there? Are you answering that? Are you so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see who we've got on the audience. So okay, that's interesting. So the biggest, but nearly half of you are in controls and compliance, which is not at all surprising, obviously, because the governance, risk management, compliance sort of thinking drives that. Second biggest function, risk management. Other business functions, I wish I'd asked some specific functions, right? So, and very few consultants. Okay, thank you very much. So you know who you're sharing your 50 minutes with. So let's start by looking at what's really going on in business with all of this discussion and activity around digital transformation, and how does it affect risk management? So if you've attended any of our webcasts recently, you'll have heard this, but it's kind of relevant to pretty much everything we do. And your executives, your C-suite are constantly encouraged to go and talk to the digital natives, understand how the digital natives are operating. And my point is, these guys, the guys at the top you'll identify very clearly as digital natives, and some of the ones at the bottom you might not identify them so much, but they all have a really important story to tell in the world of digital. And we could run a whole workshop, in fact we do, a whole workshop on digital transformation and talk about these case studies. I'm going to pick on two. So Netflix, we all know Netflix, video, movie streaming. And I'm a customer of Netflix. I'm an economic customer, and I pay some money every month. I don't know how much it is, but I pay. It goes out the door, and I'm not even sure how much it is. But they don't communicate with me. They just take my money. But we have 5 consumers of Netflix in my household, and Netflix are much more interested in the behavior of the 12-year-old boy and what he wants to watch and what his favorites might be and what they should serve up to him. And the same for the 16-year-old girl. And also what the 19-year-old boy wants to look at, if indeed they serve it up on Netflix. The point being that they're absolutely focused on the consumer and not so focused on the economic customer. And whilst that might be obvious, in business, we've always been told the customer is king, but maybe that's not so true anymore. The economic customer, the person that pays for it, may not be the primary focus of influence or delivery. So that's worth thinking about. The other point is, or the other example I want to share is Uber and Airbnb, 2 great examples of businesses with very high revenues but 0 assets, a lot of cash being generated, and they're both kind of dating applications really for people who want some convenient access to either transportation or accommodation. And the focus here very much is, as it is again across the piece in this world, is about convenience. It's all about how do we maximize convenience for the consumer. So just to be very swift about this, the kind of lesson we can draw from a lot of these successes is be careful about worrying too much about the economic customer, because it's the consumer that matters. And the second thing is focus on intimacy and convenience. Now, how does that relate to us in risk management? Well, it relates to us for every business function. And risk management, it raises the fact there are risks that are emerging which we might not have thought about before, related to the consumer rather than the customer, and related to the convenience, the risks related to convenience and intimacy. So just think about that for a minute. So on this topic of the digital world, so I just want to talk a little bit about transformation. It's a very, very easy word to use, and I think we all get frustrated when we hear that somebody has automated a spreadsheet, putting it into an ERP system, and believe they've conducted some form of transformation. So transformation isn't the same as automating a task. It's a metamorphosis. So the picture on the left is Escher's impossible waterfall, which is going uphill. So that's what makes it impossible. On the right-hand side is a process overview for Uber. We just talked about them. And I want to talk this through because I want you to think about this. So when Uber open up in a new city, they acquire service providers, that's the drivers, and they take those on and they acquire customers. And then when we turn up in that city, we open our phone and we open the app and they locate us where we are. And we say we want to go from A to B, they propose a service, and they select a service provider, the driver. At the point at which you say, yeah, I want to do that, they commit the service provider. So think about that. They're committing the supplier before they commit the customer. That's pretty unusual. Not many businesses do that. Not on a supply for a specific order. And the next thing, obviously within half a second or so, they commit and charge a customer. So that's us. So, and we get charged the same day. So Uber's days sales outstanding, their DSO is 0. Now, if you've ever worked in a business with a DSO of under 30 days, you think you're living in nirvana. Imagine if you were living in a business with a DSO of 0. So it's kind of a massive change in how cash conversion goes on. Then we get to paying the service provider, paying the driver. Well, the driver may only get paid 75% of the fee, but he or she gets paid within 7 days of the ride. And if you speak to them, they say, this is pretty good news because you work for a big company, you usually don't get paid for 30 or 45 days. So getting paid in 7 days is great news. So in this process, the customer is delighted. They got the convenience and intimacy they desire. The supplier is delighted because they're getting what they need. And there's a massive cash conversion cycle, great float of cash in there. And everyone's a winner. And when you look at that process isn't a classic revenue cycle, a classic order to cash, nor is it a classic purchase to pay. It's some kind of integrated, combined business process. The point I raise is that apart from it being on a mobile phone, that's not particularly technically complex. There's no sophisticated technologies being used. So the issue is about the process and the business model and the way in which they've ordered the priorities. And I think that's important for us to think about with transformation for two reasons. One is, as our businesses transform their business models and business processes, we've got to understand the impact on risk. But second of all, we can transform our risk management processes in the same way and work out what sequence do we really need to do things in that drives the maximum value for the organization. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. I want you to think about that because I think it's really, really central to what we're doing in the current world. So what's going on really? Well, a massive disruption. We know what's going on in society, you know, customers, suppliers, partners, and so on. There's a consumer awakening. So this whole idea about focus on the consumer, even classic business-to-business customers are now realizing that if they don't have an intimate relationship with their consumer, they're going to be dead in the future. So you see very large consumer goods companies focusing on the consumer when they used to just worry about distribution channels. The transparency and volume of data is how we get a lot of that intimacy. And of course, our stakeholders, whether they're management, shareholders, or external stakeholders, want less cost, less cycle time, less negatives, and more of all the good stuff. Now, if that wasn't enough, we've also moved to a world that just achieving great business results isn't enough. There's a growing scrutiny of how we generate those results as well as what we do. So it's a team game. Our supply chain partners, our ecosystem partners, our suppliers all matter because how they behave is part of our brand. So we've got this issue now about principled performance. You have to be able to deliver results within the principles you espouse. All that relates to risk management. So let's talk a little bit about this and the emerging imperatives. So we've talked about what's changing in business, but also the risk landscape is getting more complex, not just from the points I've raised already, but regulation, expectations are changing. And more business leaders are saying, I don't just want to be compliant, I want to be able to run a better business, and I want to use risk management to drive better decision-making, a better management of the business. All these things are important. More focus on risk, looking at risk ahead of the curve, as well as looking back at making sure what we do today is compliant. And we've coined this term risk-informed decision-making. This is what leaders are looking for. They're looking for a mechanism to make it much more dynamic and agile, that we can make decisions across the business informed on appropriate risk for the best value of the business. Excuse me. Now, managing risk is an interesting discussion because risk management, certainly in the English language, risk is always perceived as a bad thing. It's something you want to avoid. But of course, the reality is you can't really avoid risk, you can mitigate it. But it's really about achieving sustainable performance and value as a business. Everything we do in a business, everything we do as individuals has a risk associated with it. Whether it's a merger, contemplating a merger with a peer or crossing the road. So there's threat and opportunity in everything, and these are two sides of the same coin. And I think leadership are now realizing that risk management isn't just about the bad stuff. It's about optimizing decisions we make to drive the best results with the least worst outcome. So when we look at our world, we have certainly for the past 10 to 15 years very much focused on risk management from the things that operate in the company, our products, our people, our policies, our organization, financial processes, operational issues, systems, all that good stuff. And that's all very good. And a lot of that's been kind of reinforced by kind of a Sarbanes-Oxley way of thinking from a compliance perspective. But in reality, our risks are much bigger. We have a whole bunch of risks that are not internal, but they're external. They're related to how we interact with our customers, our suppliers, our ecosystem, related to our reputation, regulations, even expectations that people have of us, even expectations that people that might not even be customers have of us, all affect our opportunity for maximum performance. So whilst this has always been true to an extent, I think the digital world is making this much more dramatic and a much bigger balance between the two. And of course, it leads us to this idea about this whole balance. And then how do we deal with these things? Because we're used to looking at control over risk. So the things that are internal to us, we applied policies and controls to make sure that bad things didn't happen, and we still do that. But the things that are outside the organization, we can only influence, we can't really control. So we need to think about different ways of dealing with these things. It's a really important way of thinking about risk management. And certainly the new thinking is all about having a bigger view and how do we balance all these out, because we can do all the wonderful things internally and control ourselves, but we may have things we can't influence might damage us massively, like problems in our supply chain. Now, you look at all these different stakeholders in the organization and beyond, and one of the challenges we have in all business processes and in risk management is recognizing the fact that not all our executives are absolutely aligned on priorities. It's quite natural that the executive responsible for the sales and marketing part of the business has a different set of priorities to the people responsible for the settlement and financial accounting part of the business. And that is true across the organization. Now, we try to align it, but people have different performance measures, different measures of success. So I kind of refer to this as different lighthouses as you're coming in, sailing into a port. And you've got to recognize that different lighthouses might be in different places, but you've got to work out how to align them. And I think this is a key issue for risk management today. We can't assume everything is going to be simple. It is complex, and we've got to manage that complexity. And part of that is understanding the relative priorities and alignment and helping navigate those. So, of course, we also talk about, in risk management, we talk about GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. And this has been a popular theme and term for the past 15 years, mostly focused at technology, to be fair, but it is a generic term for the processes as well. And because the term is now 15 years old, I think there's quite a reaction that time for a new term, and people talk about integrated risk management now. And there's a lot of discussion about which is the right focus and should you be doing GRC or RM, and lots of hashtags about what you should do. I think the truth of the matter is these are interesting debates, but the critical issues are far more fundamental. It's how do we organize ourselves and have processes to support the demands and needs of the business today and going forward related to our drive for performance and risk management. And personally, I think the debate about terms is probably secondary, if not third to that. Fundamentally, it's all about decision making. So the essence of what we do in business is make decisions. And when decisions go wrong, or when the results of decisions go wrong, it's interesting to work out why they go wrong. And these are typically the reasons why decisions produce or things go wrong. It's poor framing of the decision, perhaps not a complete perspective of really what that decision was about, incorrect assumptions or incomplete assumptions, not enough information. But quite often it's to do with, it's not just not having the information, it's not going after all the information that you need to make that decision, maybe because you don't have the time, not considering all the options, and not considering unintended consequences. And these are, this is the thinking about, if we were better informed in decision making, we'd have a lot fewer situations of these decisions going wrong. So that's why we talk about risk-informed decision making. And leaders today are interested in making this part of the fabric of management. Risk-informed decision making is risk management. And if you wanted a manifesto for it, I think this is, I'm not a sailor, but if I was, I would definitely stand by this. But the idea of, we are charting a course, the conditions are not of our choosing. They can be benign or they can be unpleasant. And pessimists complain about wind, optimists expect it to change, but the leader just adjusts the sails to get to the destination, the most safest but fastest way to get there. And that's an interesting way to think about risk management. So I've got a question for you. So risk management as a process. So I'm not talking about technology, as a process. Where are you in your organization on the journey to risk management, of risk management processes? Do you have silos of risk management, policy, controls, and compliance management across the organization? Do you have, are you considering an enterprise-wide focus, a more coherent focus across the organization on this? Are you developing that enterprise-wide focus and you're developing the process? Or you already have that enterprise-wide focus and process and you're optimizing it today? Or for some reason, is it not applicable to you? So this is risk management as a process for your organization. Have a think about that. It should only take you, well, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Hopefully it will take you less than 10 seconds. But it's just really, are you siloed? Are you starting to think about having a coherent approach across the organization? Are you really developing that coherent enterprise-wide approach? Or you have it and you're optimizing it, or not applicable? So let's have a look at the old scoreboard. Right, okay. Well, I think everyone's being honest, which is good. So just under 40% of you are siloed, which is kind of, that's what we expect. That is common denominator. It's good to see that 35% of you are developing enterprise-wide focus, and 22% you have one and you're optimizing. That is, that's pretty good. It's interesting. There seems to be a jump from you're either in silos or you're developing it. There's very few people considering it, which is kind of interesting. But okay, so this is, again, it's all anonymous, but it's worth being aware of. Thanks very much for that. So another question for you. I've talked about process there. Now, when you talk about technology, risk management, GRC technology journey, this is the same question, but it's around technology. So do you, technology-wise, have silos for all these things? Are you considering an enterprise-wide landscape technologically? Because you may be considering these things process-wise, but not technologically, and vice versa. You're developing an enterprise landscape technologically, and you have one, and you're optimizing it or not applicable. So this is the same questions before, but it's about technology now, not about process. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. Give you 5 seconds. So this is just where you are in terms of technology. I just think it's interesting to see what the balance of focus is from you all. It's anonymous, say what you like. Let's have a look. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, okay, so it follows. So the implication is that either people misunderstood my first question, or hopefully that most people are aligned between process and technology, which actually would be a bit of a surprise, but it's still good. So 34% of you, silos. Second, again, developing it. And 16%, you have an enterprise-wide landscape focus. And there's more people considering the enterprise-wide landscape focus in technology than are in process. Now, that's an interesting point, isn't it? But anyway, we'll get on to that. Thank you for that. Hope you thought that was a little bit of insight there. So I've drawn a bit of a picture here about what's going on in business, and I hope I've given you some food for thought, because it isn't all as obvious as it seems. And what we need about what's demanded from us in risk management. So now we want to talk through these 8 vectors for change, and I'm going to ask Hans to talk to us about these, because these are really critical areas we need to think about in our own organizations. Hans.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, there are a lot of facets that you have to look at if you think about the new world of a more agile risk management process and solution. We've grouped them into vectors just to make it clear that there are various angles where you have to look at. 8 vectors ranging from the mandate to the costs involved, and you need to look at all of those vectors. They can, of course, have different relative importance per organization, and you have to adjust that for yourself. But we think that you need elements of all vectors to be able to successfully implement the new agile risk management solution. We start by the mandate as the first vector, and you would say knowing what is expected from risk management and the outcomes is an easy thing. Well, we are applying our what we call our Pentagon, our 9-segment approach to manage the journey to a new risk management support level, and we are always surprised. Well, maybe not surprised anymore. That the outcomes are not so obvious as you think, or not agreed between all the involved participants. So spending time on the outcomes is a very worthwhile initiative, because otherwise you might go astray in the rest of your activities. And when we talk about outcomes, we talk about 2 main elements: the value that the risk management solution will bring to your organization, and the adoption of that solution by the organization. Because a perfectly designed and even perfectly tool-supported solution can bring value, but if it's not used, well, the value will be short-lived. So look at all these elements and make sure that you will address the needs of all involved participants. Another element of the mandate is the clarity of the messaging, and I always love to have some Dilbert in my presentations, because it tells us a clear story that if you're not concise in this picture, you communicate not the right things to the right levels, and they are not lived. So we always say it's the tone from the top that makes the music, but the song is sung by all in the organization. So if you don't communicate about the right things and the right reasons, you will also fail the adoption part of your implementation. The second vector then showed you this picture about the risk types that need to be managed. And if you look at them, you can group them based on a sort of risk typology. And you can have strategic risks, operational risk, financial risk, compliance risk, and reputational risk. This is an example. Some organizations group them a bit differently. But probably you will have to pay attention to all of them. But they don't have all the different, they all use different processes. They sometimes have different priorities in the organizations. For instance, if you look at fraud, it demands other elements than compliance risks. Quite obvious, different process, different involved people, different speed. In order to be aware of that and to work it into your solution, it is good to take the internal tug of war into consideration, whereby for every risk that you define or think worthy of managing, you have to look upon those 4 arrows, how that risk scores more towards the opportunity, more towards the risk or the threat, and in the other talk between the prevention with all the policies and controls in place, and the other side, the agility of the organization doing the actual business. So by having this view on top of your risk, you can categorize them better, and you can also define better what priorities are and what maybe conflicting priorities are between different risks. The third vector is process. Process being the start of everything. If you don't have a process that you agree upon, you don't know what you're going after, and you don't know what journey you will embrace between your current process and the to be achieved process. You don't know how you can embed risk management not as something on top of the business, but as part of the business as usual. You need it to make sure that you have the right resources to execute and manage the process. And last but not least, only when you know what your process is and the process where you want to be in a few years, you can do the proper technology selection and usage of the technology in function of the process, and not determining the process. Processes should be more agile than we used to execute them in the past. And we should get away from silos and think more end-to-end, which makes them more insightful and in practice also often speedier. We have to make them more actionable. It's not good to have a brilliant report if you don't act upon the insights that that report can give you. And we should reuse much more than we do today. The paradigms that you have to keep in mind there is that if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what the guiding principles are, and if you don't know what the desired outcome is, measured desired outcome, you will take the wrong decisions on the mitigations, and you will take the wrong decisions on applying underlying technology. You could use much more smart analytics for multiple stakeholders and multiple purposes than we do today. Too many stovepipe rounds, and the new mindset should be to have a more agile solution for them. I showed you the Pentagon, and which addresses all the segments relevant to the journey. If you dive a bit deeper into that journey, there is also the notion that you have to apply certain steps in that to make that happen. And typically, we are quite good in diagnosing the problem and designing a solution for it, implementing, documenting, and educating it. But what we see is that there is less emphasis on the confirmation of the design before you start implementing it. We rush to the tools too often, too quickly. Confirm that the whole design of the process and the supporting technology will give you the value and will give you the chance for the adoption that you're seeking for. Otherwise, after a year, you implement something that nobody was expecting. And at the end, we sometimes forget to verify openly and clearly if we have achieved the value and the adoption that we're planning for. And last but not least, change is always there. It's the only constant. So we have to make sure that what we implement sustains for today and gives a ground for sustainability in the future. The fourth vector is data. Obvious. Data is very, very important. It is the lifeblood of our organizations. But data is sometimes easily overlooked for its complexity. This is an example of when you ask various people on how many countries are there in the world, how you can get very different answers with a big delta, completely depending who you're asking, in what context, yeah, and by whom probably. And if you transport this to your own organization, you're probably aware that if you would ask in your organization to a number of people, how many customers do we have, you will get different answers. The same for vendors, or even something as trivial as business units. How many business units do we have? You get very different answers. So before you harmonize those answers, you are unclear what the real truth behind the data is. So data fact, it's the lifeblood, it's everywhere, it's an absolute measure, but the reality is that a lot of data in the organizations is not standardized, harmonized. Many parents around, and if we ever aggregate, we sometimes aggregate, well, different sorts of apples together without knowing it. So what we need is agreed definitions, a very good reliable quality, and of course the data should be relevant to the risk management that we want to apply. And maybe there is some master data management activity in place already in your organization that can help you there. Otherwise, risk management improvement, risk management journey shouldn't start without proper data definition. And for that, we absolutely think there is a need for a business data model. It's not a technology model, it's not a database model, it is a model that let us structure the data that is involved in risk management. We can understand it, we can communicate by it, and it is the basis for all our analytics and continuous monitoring, making sure that the various sources of data map to the right common agreed elements, and in that sense is the backbone of the risk-informed decision making. The fifth vector, participants. Probably many of you will recognize here a sort of third line of defense kind of picture. Well, actually, we've adjusted it a bit, and we call it the lines of engagement. Because for risk management, with all the stakeholders and their changing needs as Dan described, we think we should go from the negative line of defense to the more positive lines of engagement. And on a micro level, you see some differences there that we have added. We think that shareholders are becoming a much more important group of people that are involved, maybe very indirectly, but they have a big say. So we should include their needs and their thoughts also in risk management. And of course, a strong element to the right are the regulators. More and more regulators are influencing our day-to-day risk management operation. Think, for instance, about GDPR, which costs a lot of companies a lot of money. I repeat Dan's lighthouses picture, because in managing stakeholders and performance measures, you have to be aware of the different KRIs, KPIs, and whatever indicators they may have, and that you're aware of them, that there are differences, and that you also strengthen where there are commonalities, and at least are making sure that both the involved stakeholders know from each other where their indicators lie, so that you can make sure that you harmonize them as much as possible, or if they are inevitable, very different, that you work around them. Simple example is the risk owner is primarily interested in doing the daily business, and will take certain risks for that, whereby a specialist is looking for 100% controls reliability, and those things might clash with each other. If we talk about participants, we often think organizations, organization A or unit A, B talking to whoever, but essentially organizations we talk about people, individuals, and the way we communicate with each other is rapidly changing every day, we could say, from a traditional hierarchy-based way of communicating. We are going more for a value-based way of communicating with multidisciplinary teams, groups cut across families, etc., etc. And we have to adjust to that. And for some people, that is more easy than other people. Our brains have to adjust to this new way of communicating. And if you want to make best use of that, you should organize the participation of people around how the effectiveness of their contributions that they can bring, and not how they are depicted in an organization chart or in a dotted line structure. It's all about effectiveness of the participants towards the common risk management goal. And we also don't have to forget that the participants themselves are reshaping the talent that they bring to the table, or the talent of the people that they second in risk management activities. From the traditional I-shaped expert type of person, we go to the T-shaped situation, where people are capable of a lot of things, and in that way it can better contribute to this effective risk management situation. And we're all human, so if we ask people to change, risk management journey is a change. We ask them to participate, and sometimes, if it's easy to see only rough spots and negative elements in their change, they will not jump on it, and that impacts, of course, seriously the adoption of your journey. So what's in it for me factor, and I took this from John Gorville's work, is very important. So coming back to the outcomes, when you define the outcomes, try to be in the shoes of all the stakeholders and try to figure out if there's something in it for them that can help the adoption. The sixth factor, technology. Well, our landscapes have become more and more complex over the years. We were trying to get ERP suites in place with as much integration as possible, with the good news that they often were using the same data definitions. But the business world, and the functions that we have to support are getting so complex that this model doesn't work anymore. And we see more and more large organizations grow into a hybrid hub and spoke reality, where there will be a central ERP, being it cloud or being it on-premise, with around that a big number of on-premise and cloud supporting solutions, not all the time from the same vendor, and certainly having different data definitions. making risk management a more complex endeavor, because we have to think first data mapping before we can actually exchange data between those elements in the context of risk management. And we are not there. It's getting even more complex because we have this lightning purple cloud to the left of external data sources that we use, web information portals, services, etc. Don't forget the social media impact. Customers or consumers, as Dan has depicted them, that both might have access to your services in an indirect or even direct way. So ever more complex, and risk management has to cater for that. There's a lot of technology around in the risk management arena. Hundreds of tools, maybe thousands of tools if you count each and every little offering together. We tend to try to organize them in what they are meant for, in these three categories that you see here, from prescribe and prevent, guide and detect, up to observe and correlate insight. And to the right, we have added some of the typical terminology that you will see accompanied with those three elements. We think you should use technology for what it's meant to do. That sounds like a very, very open door remark, but we too often see that organizations try to use technology for different things that they are not meant for, doing a lot of customizations. As long as you always keep in mind that there will probably be no tool that serves all your requirements, and you have to have multiple tools, make sure that they don't overlap and don't interfere with each other. And then, yeah, talking about technology and the buzzword bingo around it, we are inundated with the hype of the month or the year. All the time, and sometimes we don't see, we don't realize what they mean, and especially the marketing messages are sometimes quite cloudy. So what I've done here is give you the elevator description of the technology as it is seen in general, and I gave some thumbs up for the lines of involvement in one of my previous pictures, to show how relevant I think that technology is for those groups. And you see it's quite different. And you might discuss the number of thumbs up and disagree completely with me. But I think it is an interesting overview to keep in mind, and maybe map what you have in-house today and what your plans are for newer stuff on top of this. And for technology, we also need to thank Gartner again for their hype cycle. It is true. We see the hypes come and go. We see the peaks of inflated expectation, and it takes quite some time to get to a plateau of productivity with most technologies. Duration is, I think, our biggest enemy in that respect. But technology certainly can help and can make risk management endeavors much more agile. And as long as they contribute to one or more of the above 6 elements, they can really help you to speed up. It's not about automation all the time. It is about sensible organizing your technology that will give you the biggest advantages. Speed, the 7th vector. You have really the need to define what speed you need for what risk categories. There will be a different need. For instance, having real-time risk management, another nice marketing slogan that is out there, might be more relevant for one category than for another. So you should pick and choose the speed for your risk category, and apply it wisely there. And the last vector is, of course, cost. Risk management endeavors are not cheap because there are a lot of people involved, but you do it for a reason. And if you do it for the prime reason of having more risk-informed decision-making, better risk-informed decision-making, transparency and compliancy, if that's your rationale, then you can define that into a value statement as concrete as possible, as clearly as possible, and you should be able to check it if you get what the outcome that you planned for it, and then you can have the discussion if the cost level is acceptable. And don't forget, it's the total cost of the risk management process, the people, process, and yes, the technology also. And don't forget the cost of the change management journey. If you balance those three elements, rationale, value, and cost, then you will know what you have to afford, what you can afford, and what do you need to afford. You can do quite nice agile things in the cost sector by looking at, for instance, these examples. There are quick wins. There are things to consider to organize things more efficiently and more effectively. You can take more pragmatic approaches to technology. Why customize everything? Just go for out of the box. That makes life much easier long term. And maybe you should use your resources, your human resources, in a different way. For instance, some job rotation, get some operations people to a center of excellence, risk management center of excellence, and then once they have understand the wider context and brought in their local expertise, they can go back to operations and even perform better there and be probably a big advocate for the risk management solution to their colleagues. So we can, if we think about cost in a bit more agile way, save and be more effective. It was a long story about our 8 vectors. As a summary, we think you need to address them all, but you have to choose wisely which ones are more relevant to you than others, which ones you can afford better than others, and which ones show the biggest delta between what you have today and where you want to go.
Thanks very much, Hans. That's an important set of topics to think about. So it's worth bearing those in mind in your own journey. So as I said earlier, there's a lot of meat in this. So please ask your questions through the interface. We will endeavour to get to them. But while you're asking a question, I've got one more question for you. Thinking about change management and adoption that Hans described, what's your experience in your own organisation? Is it one, that every group in your organization operates their own expectations? Is it 2, you strive for a common process but struggle with adoption? Is it you've got a common technology, but you've got process adoption challenges, or you've got common process and technology adoption challenges, or you're well on the road to a common consistent approach? Okay, and this is focused very much on change management adoption. So if you ever think about that, and again, these are anonymous responses, just give us your thoughts on this. So where is your challenge, or where are you on that journey with change management and getting the organization to adopt your chosen risk management process and approach? So as I say, so everyone doing their own thing, you're striving for it, but you're struggling with adoption, or you do have a common technology with process adoption challenges, or you do have a common process with technology adoption challenges, or 5, you're well on the road, and you should be speaking on our next webcast. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so adoption, okay, they're by far the biggest, 43%, strive for common process but struggle with adoption. That is a common refrain. Hopefully some of the things you've heard already will help with that. There's a lot of work we're doing around this whole adoption piece and about helping, you know, drive that motivating, the what's in it for me thing that Hans talked about. So thank you very much for that. So let's just think about what this new model needs to be for risk management, governance, risk management, compliance, or integrated risk management. So this idea of AAA, a AAA trifecta here, the area, analytics, and approach, things to think about as you start to get specific about how you approach this. So the area is really about the scope and the data. So scope, risks, and data. But of course, risk and data is very related because you only manage risk through your understanding of information. So that element there, supported by analytics, aggregated analytics, tackling the sources of data, and including verification and attestation you need to be able to validate decisions that have been made. And an approach which is an agile methodology with the right performance indicators and a mechanism for communicating, alerting, and escalating. So that kind of three-way model, that trifecta, is an interesting way, an important way to think about the new model. Hans talked a little bit about our process, our Pentagon, about how to think about process. I can't reinforce how important that is. A lot of organizations tend to focus heavily on technology first, or sometimes just focus on the process itself. There are nine themes to this, and you need to put serious attention to all 9. So to be able to get to where you want to be, this approach diagnosing your current capability in each of those areas and what the issues are, where you're doing well and where you're not, almost like a customer journey, and designing and confirming what works best in your organization, and then implementing and taking that through to verification and sustenance. So that's a kind of an important, I encourage you to think about that. But when we look at all the issues, all of the individual evidences of threats, large and small, individual issues in our businesses may not be material. In fact, a lot of them, most of them are not material in their own right. What's really interesting about risk management is the aggregation of these issues into specific risks does become material, does become very important. And our challenge is to be able to move from this kind of interest in all of the minutiae into the understanding of the key risks. And this is definitely one of the areas we've been challenged with, I think, certainly in Sarbanes-Oxley thinking, focusing on individual tiny little defects and not being clear enough about the risk. But what I think this is leading us to is this idea of the ability to be able to show leadership and management across the organization worldwide about where we stand on a daily dynamic basis. Where are we in terms of corporate risk? Where are we red, amber, green? Where are we? Where's the heat? Where the things that we need to pay attention to? And also, how are we doing by business unit, location, region? Where's the red, amber, green? Now, it's all very nice to see a dashboard, but the point about it is this all has to be based on well thought out weightings of all of those individual issues that you saw on the previous chart there. So we've done a lot of work on that, the weighting of the complex weighting of all the different indicators that lead to how you should really rate your level of concern, your residual risk, if you like. So this is kind of an important point, and we need to be able to drill down and look at the detail about each of these things, whether in headquarters, whether in a regional office, or whether working with an individual vendor. So when we think about those kind of approaches, let's just think about what we've learned and what the conclusions are. We talked at the beginning, and hopefully you've got the idea that we're really thinking about now about let's stop looking backwards, let's focus forwards. How do we help run the business today and tomorrow rather than work out how well we did yesterday? We need to have a roadmap, we need to have a journey, and we need to set ourselves that vision at some point in the future, but really clear milestones so that we can align stakeholders and participants around not just progress towards it, but also align it around what's in it for me. Because some what's in it for me might be today, some might be 6 months' time. We've got to align around that. In terms of creating value, I think you can summarize it. What we've talked about is we've got to focus on business processes and data, because that leads to our understanding of risk. We've got to really focus on that pentagon about the desired outcomes. As Hans said, it isn't obvious. Every discussion we have, it becomes less obvious as the discussion continues. We've got to look at working practices and behaviors as well as process. We've got to understand all of that to design something that works, and configure technology to support the process and not try and configure the process to support the technology. Driving alignment between stakeholders for successful adoption. That's the lighthouses. How do we make sure we get an effective business as usual that works, and how do we have governance for continuous improvements and so on? So as you think about all this, you might want to think about, so what should you do? I definitely encourage you to think about the Pentagon and some of the other tools we've shared with you. think about a strength, weakness, opportunities, threat on your current situation across those 9 dimensions. What are the imperatives for change, and what do you need to do to try to get buy-in and understanding about those different levers? Or you could look at your individual current initiatives, so those of you on the way to a particular destination, map that against it. Or you could say, we want to take a fresh look about how we start this journey on a new way of thinking about risk management and risk-informed decision making. So thank you very much for that. You've been asking questions. Keep asking them. I'm going to give you, I know we're over our time, but I'm going to answer a couple anyway. So if you're still there, you're going to get some answers. Right. Keep asking those questions, but I'll take one now. What have we got here? Okay. The risk management process across our organization is very complex and a lot of moving parts. How do you address this in an agile way? Okay. So it is true, risk management in the whole is complex, and as you say, it touches everyone in the organization. But I would encourage you to think about the Pentagon that we talked about, and also you don't have to think about risk management as one big process. We tend to look at it as journeys. You might have 7 or 8 journeys associated with risk management in the organization, which touch one or more of the participants. Very few people will touch all of them, but if you look at the individual journeys, you map that through the Pentagon, and then you're going to have that process improvement approach of diagnosis, work out what's wrong, where the good bits are and where the weak bits are. You've got a much more manageable way of addressing that. So that's, hopefully that helps you with that question. But I do appreciate it can be it looked like a mountain to start with, but you need to break it down into manageable chunks, and those are the journeys. One more question. What else have we got here? Okay. We are looking at replacing our current GRC tools. Is there a specific approach that you suggest we do? We use it, I guess. We use. Okay, Hans, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I would say process first, as I earlier tried to convey. Consider the 8 vectors and what matters in your context. So there is no point in implementing new tools if you haven't yet thought out your optimal process, the way you want to go. So process first, vectors as a benchmark, and then decide if what you have is still viable, or that you have to go to something new, and then test the new thing that you're going for against those vectors.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, just be very careful in implementing new tools if you haven't yet thought out what your process should be. Conscious of time, I'll give one more here. We have a problem with risk owners and ownership. Any ideas? I think a lot of people have a problem with risk owners and ownership. I think it's a common problem. It's often historic. Sometimes it's come out of, I don't know, I see a lot of this comes out. The risk owners have been identified often out of some early SOX work, and the risk owners probably weren't the real risk owners. They were kind of proxies for the real risk owners. So my suggestion is to definitely start with a clean sheet of paper, look at the business processes, the core end-to-end processes, and who owns them. And that isn't always obvious, but work out who owns the processes. Use a data model to help this, because data and process go hand in hand. It helps you align risk with process, and it helps you identify who owns what. Ultimately, you're going to need executive leadership, which you can engage through the Pentagon discussions to engage and lead on it, because you're probably going to find that people who are currently tagged as risk owners aren't really, and that's probably an element of why the process isn't working so well. Risk owners should be the process owners, in my experience. I'm very conscious of time. We've overrun. I do appreciate your attention. I hope you found it useful and thought-provoking. We've enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. If you've got questions you haven't asked, you can send us an email, or you can use any of the other amazing technologies listed there to communicate. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, morning, evening, night, wherever you are. Thanks a lot.